right, let's talk about great teams. So great teams have great depth. That's a John Maxwell quote. So what typically happens in an organization, so let's say you're a business or you're a corporation or a nonprofit, and you have a leadership team, and then you have smaller teams, and you have your workforce, right? So what typically happens is the leaders really focus on the starter players, right? So we call them, in Grow by One, we call them the Eagles, right? The people who are the top performers, the ones who are getting not only the most work done, but they have the most impact on the team. Okay. Now, really, if you follow the Pareto principle, which is the 20-80 rule, gosh, I wish I had more time to talk about that, but maybe that'll be for a different podcast. But really what we want to do is we want to put 80% of our time, our resources, and our development funds into the top 20% of our performers. Now, that's not typically done, and if you search our podcast, you'll find some other episodes that talk about how do you deal with eagles and seagulls, so you can listen to that. But what typically happens is that we focus on the 80% of our time on reforming the bottom 20%, right? And that's a problem. So our goal is to really up-level those top performers so that we can get maximum impact for our team, right? However, okay, so I come into different businesses and nonprofits and I do all kinds of leadership training with them. And the one thing that I can tell you is that very few companies actually have a development program for what you can consider bench players, right? They definitely have a program for developing their leaders. However, they haven't really identified who might be an up-and-coming performer, right? Now, this is a problem because if you only focus on trainings for, let's say, your intake trainings, right? This is how our company works, or compliance trainings. Hey, you clearly didn't work well doing this one thing, so I'm going to send you to another training, right? If that's all you do for your bench players, you're going to get to a point where one of your starters needs to leave for some reason, right? I mean, think about a sports team. What if they're injured or transferred or promoted or they retire, right? So for your leadership team, what if they get sick, right? What if they go on to something bigger and better? Or what if, they're just getting ready to retire? How do you replace them? What's your plan? You got to have an eye on your whole team, right? Especially your bench, so that you can pull some of those bench players up into being starter players again. Does that make sense? Okay, so how do you identify bench players? Honestly, I would look at who fills in for short-term projects, right? So who volunteers and says, yeah, I'd love to help with that. Who volunteers to stay after and do work that maybe isn't in their job description? Another one, who is curious about what's happening, right? Ask questions about what's happening with the team, what's happening with the work. Maybe they're the person who, maybe as a leader, you get a little annoyed with them because they ask so many questions. Well, their inquiry might be the tip that says, hey, focus on them a little bit, okay? So you're looking for the bench player who wants to be more plugged into the team. Now, the one thing I can tell you is be careful, okay? Some people want to be promoted for their own selfish, egotistical reasons. So get to know them. If they're showing promise, get to know them. Just because they show promise does not mean they become a starter, right? And we also want to give them opportunities. So maybe, you have a team leader who is, on maternity leave. Can you take one of those bench players and bring them up and, see how they perform? Okay. Now, what if you are the young leader? What if you're the bench player, right? So there's a few things that you can do to really help yourself to shine above the rest, Okay? So the first thing I think of is, be the one to volunteer. Be the one to be curious. But listen, do not kill yourself, okay? I can't even tell you how many people who say, I want to be in that leadership position. And they give everything of their life. They work tons of hours. They sacrifice their family. They sacrifice their own personal development. They check a ton of boxes for their leader, but not for themselves. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not good. That's not good for you. That's ultimately not good for your team. Okay? Because the worst thing that you can do is to be promoted into a starter player and be so exhausted and overwhelmed that you can't do your job. Okay? So you want to outshine, but you also want to be competing with yourself and no one else. So this is not this is what Susie over in that cubicle is doing. I'm going to one up her. No. How can you be better today than you were yesterday? Your only competition is you. Develop you. That's all you have control over. Okay? The next tip is really to be ready, right? Develop yourself. So if you know that your team is working on a certain program or a product launch, right? Do you know everything about that program or that product? Have you done your homework? Do you know what the team goals are? Okay? So be ready. Do you know what each person does on that team? Sometimes just by doing your research, you can find that there's certain holes there and you can go, oh, I can help with that one. Okay? Be ready. Because sometimes a bench player turns into a starter player only because they were ready and available when the time came. Another thing is, work ethic. Listen, again, this goes back to the outshine part, but do your very best today. Work ethic is more than, can I produce a whole bunch of stuff? Because work ethic, there's also an element of, thought to it. So it's not just are you doing something, but are you thinking something, right? So good work ethic comes from knowing the right thing to do and then doing it and consistently doing that. So do you show up to work on time or early? What systems do you have in place that help you to be the most productive that you can be? So really you're looking at how can you be the best team player regardless of the position that you're in? So what would it look like if you're not in a leadership position? What would it look like to maybe pretend that you were, right? What does it mean to be in that leadership position? What characteristics or qualities could you develop that might get you ready for that leadership position? And then the last is really this idea of service. Your job as a bench player, your only job as a bench player, is to serve your team so that your team wins. It's not about you. It's not about them. It's about the team. Okay? We is greater than me. All right? And so realizing that your job is to make your team, whether it be your leader or your starters or your bench players, look good. What can you do to make your team win? Okay? I promise you, when you do that, you get noticed. It might not be today, might not be tomorrow, but eventually you get noticed. Okay? And you rise to the top. Now, let me talk to those people who are in a starter position right now. So you have, gone through that process. You're in a position of leadership. So what in the world do you do with these bench players, right? Well, I can tell you this. You want to be looking at them, you want to be noticing, and you want to be mentoring them, okay? Now, sometimes I hear from leaders, Michelle, I don't want to do that because what if they get really good and they take over my position? Okay, just from a team perspective, let's say a sports team perspective, I understand that. I totally get it. And I can say, you know what, that's your insecurity talking. Because, think about it this way. Let's say a bench player comes up and they fill your position because maybe you're injured, right? There's something that's keeping you out of play. Well, now the coach, the team leader, has more options, right? So now you can collaborate and you can make your work even bigger than it was before. And sometimes what happens is you are noticed not only for your ability to do that work, but your ability to develop other people. So guess what? You get promoted into a coach or a leadership or management supervisory position. That's not all bad either, right? So don't get stuck in your insecurity about, if I help them, then they're going to take my job, because there will always be a job for somebody who develops other people. I can assure you of that. And if it's not with your company or business, you can easily find that somewhere else. Okay? So if you are a team leader and you are not training your bench, there's a couple things to consider. Number one, if this is a brand new idea to you, reach out to us. We can do some brainstorming things for you to figure out how you might do that. Maybe this is a time for you that you're like, yeah, Michelle, I can see the value, but I'm just not so sure. Reach out, because there are things that you can do that don't cost a lot of money or resources. Another option, quite frankly, we have a group of leaders that are often very young. They're being developed. Most of them are in a position that's more of a bench player position. And quite frankly, we're developing them right now. We have several organizations we're working with that they can't take the time and money and resources to develop their bench, but they know that it's important. So they've partnered with us. They send their leaders to us. We have a discount for organizations that do this, so that we can really empower them. And quite frankly, then you'll have great feedback about whether they're a great team player and whether they're going to make a good leader. Okay? So if you would like more information about that, please follow my link to my email. Send me an email. Say, Michelle, I got to talk about my bench players. Okay? We can do that together. Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for being here today. Go out and make it a glorious day. So with that, I release you into the wild. Go forth and prosper. Have an amazing day. We'll catch you next time. All right. Bye-bye.